All right, so after catching up for a moment and a brief prayer, I've hit record, and so we're live on episode 4 of the Keep It Simple podcast. This is an episode that I've been excited about. It's really cool to me. So for any of you who watch these or listen to these who are part of our Space Between ministry, our guest needs no introduction. For a lot of you who were not part of that group, who never went to Atlanta to serve with us, he does need an introduction, but I'm really thankful to prove that the guy's real. So I've used Gabe and his stories a lot in communicating. And a lot of people are like, that's too far out. I think you're making this guy up, but Gabe Barrett exists. He's with us today in the flesh. And so Gabe, welcome to the podcast. For people that don't know you, if you would just take a few minutes, introduce yourself, kind of bring folks up to speed, maybe on how we know one another. I think that'd be a good place to start.
Absolutely. Ben, really appreciate you having me on. And yeah, man, my life is not like if I look back over some of the things that I've been through, all because of Jesus. I don't believe some of these things that I've experienced. It's just kind of crazy. But it's really a testament of whenever you are willing to raise your hand and just say, God, let's go. Wherever the adventure may lead, yes, and that old improv thing of yes, and just seeing what happens and just keeping the adventure going, keeping the story alive. You and I met in Atlanta. I used to run the M25 Mission Camp, which is basically an organization that organizes mission trips, mainly during the summer and during school holidays, for high school, middle school, college age kids to come in and work with the homeless in Atlanta. And so I did that for 12 years. And then I also, for 8 years, I was in Honduras as a missionary, and I would go back and forth. So during the school year, I would be in Honduras, where for a long time I worked at an orphanage. And then I worked with a bilingual school, teaching English and coaching and doing different things up in the mountains. Did that for several years. And so Honduras in the school year, Atlanta, mostly during the summer, leading mission teams. I think I led not quite 150. It was close to 150, like 135, 140 mission trips over that time.
Gosh.
And it was wild, man. And just all the stories that I got to see and experience and hear about, from other, teams that were serving with us. It was wild. And you got to be part of some of those, man. The front porch of Beck's house that time, I still think about that. With that worship service just kind of broke out, and we were all part of it. And we took communion that day. And Beck, who is one of my dear friends, one of your dear friends, one of the most amazing people I've ever met, has served. She serves more people in a week than most people serve in a lifetime. And just working with folks experiencing homelessness in Atlanta mainly. But, we're there worshiping, and she's like, I want to do communion. And she went in her house, and she didn't really exactly have the elements per se, but she had some hot dog buns and she had some moonshine. And I was like, hey, that's good enough for me. And so, that was a memorable experience among, a million others. And so, yeah, man, I'm excited to chat with you and just talk about what God has done and then what he's doing. Because I think there are far greater things ahead than anything we leave behind. And I'm just kind of pumped to see where things are headed.
Yeah. And so kind of cliff notes, when we met you, you had just come through a divorce.
Yeah. We're going right there, huh? Right off the bat. Less than 4 minutes in. We're
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So authenticity is kind of the key.
Yeah, man.
But yeah, so when we met you, were serving well with an intensity, when you play. So for those that don't know, Gabe was an athlete, played football at Auburn. And so there's that intensity and drive that's built in there. But so when we met you, you were, without getting like into the weeds, let's talk about like, so your time in LA.
Yep.
Kind of the moving pieces that led up to this crux, right? And then there's like a decision. And the decision is obedience or not, or something that looks completely different. And so that's what I mean when I say impactful. Like from the other side of that fence, I come in and I'm middle age. I'm 35 years old, 38 years old when we met. I can't remember, 37 years old. But I come in and just observing you as a leader, listening to your heart, us sitting talking, me and you and Corey sitting visiting after everybody else has gone to bed or doing other things, and just being incredibly encouraged because here's a dude that is raw and real, and it's like obedience over everything. And so let's kind of talk through that, and then leading up to you farming potatoes in Honduras.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's come back to the divorce piece because that is an important
Yeah,
thing to chat
yeah,
about, not in the context of my relationship as much as the authentic community church kind of thing. Because there were some really interesting things that happened, uh, good and terrible through that. As I, working at a church
yeah.
and going through a divorce that wasn't like crazy. It wasn't like infidelity or gambling or alcohol related.
Right.
Like so many divorces are just really gross and messy. This one was a little bit or very
Yeah.
different than that, but you still run into some very interesting challenges when you're in ministry and you're trying to do your best, and you're going through a really hard time at home. So I want to come back to that in just a minute. But yeah, let's go to Los Angeles. So right after college, I graduated from Auburn. Really was hoping to go on and play at the next level, play in Canada, play in arena. Went to all these tryouts, did all these different things. Nothing worked out, and that's kind of been, I don't know, my life, man. I feel like the word close is like close but not quite has been the underlying, like, if you were going to put a few words summary
Wow.
to a lot of things that have happened in my life, and now there's some funny things go with that too, and I'll tell you that in a little bit. But so it didn't quite work out. Back up even a little bit more. The year before I started playing football in high school, my high school won the state championship, and then the next year we got put out of the
Oh,
playoffs
wow.
by, what was his name? He was the starting quarterback at the Raiders for a while. Anyway, we ran into him.
Mm.
He was pretty good. Jamarcus Russell, is that his name? Anyway, um, phenomenal player in high school. We ran into him. Never got back to the state, so I missed the state championship by a season. I graduated from Auburn May
Wow.
of 2010. That following season, Cam Newton comes in. They win a national championship. So I missed a championship on bookends on both sides, man. It was just like close but not quite, right? And so anyway, graduate. I moved to Los Angeles, get this really cool opportunity to go out there, and I'm just trying to figure out what to do with my life. And I was living with a friend of mine who was in the same boat. He had just graduated. He was an engineer. He was trying to get a job. I was trying to understand what's going on. What do I want to do? And I was writing a book and just trying to discern, if you will. And I didn't have any
Mhm.
desire to start working with people living on the street and experiencing homelessness, but God just kept pushing me in that direction. That little voice in the back of your head that just kind of like, pushes
Oh,
you
yeah.
towards things, and really to get God to just leave me alone. I was like, fine, and so I found this kind of a halfway ministry that was taking people in off the streets and getting them help and figured out, and then putting them into permanent housing. And going into that, I had every stereotype you can have, right? That these folks are drug addicts and alcoholics, and they made a lot of bad decisions, and they kind of deserve where they're at. They've earned this spot
Mhm.
in life.
Mhm.
I didn't really have a ton of experience, with folks in that side of life. Some mission trips here and there, but nothing like on a deeper level. But I started actually working
Right.
with those folks and doing all the things that you kind of don't want to do. I was taking out trash and cleaning bathrooms and driving around picking up donations for this ministry. And they had a 1972, 1973 U-Haul that had been donated. That was like their donation truck. And so I'm driving this thing around on the Los Angeles interstates, and it maxed out at like 48 miles an hour. And so I was number one to everybody in traffic going by me. But I started learning a lot, right? And going in, I was like, okay, let's go save the world. And there I am cleaning toilets, which personally, and you've been through seminary, and so maybe you can kind of speak to this. Well, personally, I believe seminary or any kind of ministry training, the first 6 months should just be cleaning toilets and taking out trash. Like, I feel like that would help.
Yeah.
It's very humbling,
Yeah.
very just like learning what true service is. But more than that, I started getting to know
Yeah.
people going through the ministry, and as it turns out, most of them weren't drug addicts or alcoholics. or people that just made a bunch of bad decisions. For the most part, it was just decent, normal people that life had happened to them in some way. Yeah, maybe there was a bad decision here or there, but there was a
Hmm.
lot of people that were maybe on the run. A lot of people going through domestic violence situations, and they didn't want to be homeless, but it was either get beaten, potentially lose your life, or take your kid and get out of the house and be homeless for a little while and try to find something different. There were people that their houses had burned down.
Right.
There were folks there that had gone through Katrina, and were from New Orleans, had ended up in Los Angeles. They didn't make a bad decision to live in a place that got ruined by a hurricane. And then insurance companies decided they didn't want to actually pay for things, and so like now what do you do? So okay, well that's a whole nother situation. And then there was like this sweet little old lady, I can't remember her name, but anyway, she was in her like early to mid 80s, just the nicest woman in the world. And her husband had passed away. They never had kids, and then because of the housing crisis that happened 07, 08, 09, right there,
Hmm.
she ended up losing her
Hmm.
home and ended up homeless. I mean, just the sweetest little old lady. And so I'm running into all these situations, and they're completely challenging my understanding of life, of homelessness, of
Hmm.
whatever. And I started just doing that for a while and volunteering out there, and it started to weigh on me pretty heavily. And anyone in ministry, anyone that's kind of done mission work, you probably have a tendency to start carrying around those burdens of other people, and that was me. And all of a sudden, I went from zero to carrying everything, and it was tough, man. It was, and the same thing if you're in youth ministry or college ministry, like you start carrying the burdens of these folks that you're working with. And I remember this kind of big turning point. I was with my friend that I was living with, and we went out on a hike, and he lived kind of up, in the mountains there outside Los Angeles. And we went up, just had
Hmm.
this beautiful overlook, this nice vista, and we're looking out over the ocean, and you can see the city way on down below. You see the Hollywood sign way off in the distance. You see the airplanes coming in. Like it was just this beautiful scene. And I remember thinking, there's like 20 million, 15, 20 million people, give or take, right, in this expanse,
Wow.
right? This
Hmm.
massive area that I kind of am overlooking. And if I were to spend
Hmm.
my entire life here, let's say I live to be 80 years old. If I spend the next 60-ish years, day in, day out, loving, serving, helping, is it even going to matter? Like, how many people am I ever going to impact? Like, how many lives am I going to actually be able to change? And it was in that moment that I felt
Yeah.
that same little voice in the back of my head that had been pushing me towards all these things. It said, not your job. It's not your job to change the world, not your job to change lives. That's my job. That's God's job, is what he was saying. And he said, just go out and change somebody's day and let that be enough. And stack up as many change days as you can
Yes.
and just see what happens. And that burden was lifted. Where all of a sudden I realized my actual place in all of this, which is not at the head of the table. It's again, it's cleaning bathrooms, and it's taking out trash, and it's driving around on a U-Haul, and it's just trying to make somebody smile through a meal, through a joke, through a hug, through a conversation, through some encouragement, like these little moments that we can stack up. And that whole change a day
Hmm.
mentality is something that I brought with me. I didn't have a plan. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to do this, and it's going to turn into a ministry and a call. Like, no, I was trying to get God off my back. But then did that for a few months, and then a friend of mine who he had been my youth director in high school, he calls me up. He's working at a church in Atlanta that's really getting into homeless ministry, and they had this idea. They want to run a summer program for high school, college kids to come in and do different mission things. And he remembered me, and so he gives me a call. He says, "Hey man, what are you doing?" I was like, "Well, I'm living in Los Angeles. I'm working with the homeless." He goes, "You're hired." It's like immediately. He's like, "You're the guy." Um, and so a
Yeah.
couple months later, I moved to Atlanta and started M25, and then it was 12 years of doing that. And yeah, it was a wild ride with lots of ins and outs, and there's a whole million other things to it, but that was kind of the beginning.
And M25 is based off of Matthew 25, right? So
Yeah.
the M is Matthew 25. Um, and so then through that, leading into this fracture in relationship, because that's for a casual observer, knowing so much of the story now, where you are now,
Yeah.
who you are now, what God has done now. Gigantic piece of your story. Um, so talk through that. We don't have to get in the weeds, but just kind of talk through that decision and what led to that, and then because it's just on the backside of that I met you, and Mark and Corey and the whole gang, Hannah and everybody. But So if you will, just kind of talk through that a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, at one point, it was coming up on the anniversary, and I went to my wife and I said, "Hey, what do you want for anniversary?" And she said, "A divorce." And I said, "Well, I wasn't planning on spending that much, but I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Just kidding, me." It's fun to be able to laugh about a tumultuous, really arduous time of life. But
Oh yeah,
so
yeah,
I got married right out of college, and like, we moved to Los Angeles together. So we were. She had some clinical stuff. She's a doctor. She's way smarter than me. Phenomenal human being, incredibly smart,
yeah,
incredibly driven. I don't have anything negative to say about her as a person overall.
sure.
Um, and so we got married, and I was coming out of my last year in college was probably the worst year of my entire life. And football didn't go well. Things
Oh
like a
no.
lot of things just didn't go. When you work and you train, you do all these things, and then you just things don't quite work out. And so I got married amidst like my lowest point of life, which I don't recommend. I don't recommend anyone. And I don't know if I was thinking, oh, this will make it better. I don't know really. I think I was just floating along. I think I was just going through the motions of life, doing what I was expected to do, trying to make other people happy, trying to, do things for other folks, and never really stopping to assess, is this good long term? Is this smart? Is this what I really want? Versus, oh, okay, let's just go do that.
Mhm.
Not a lot of prayer and all that, not a lot of discernment. Um,
Yeah.
and so we were best friends. It was overall a good relationship, just not a relationship of marriage, if that makes sense. Like, people tell you marry your best friend.
Mhm.
It doesn't always work out that way. You don't always need to. Like, sometimes a friend just needs to be a friend. And we were incredible friends and just not good spouses. We were long distance,
Mhm.
90% of our relationship. And so that was a big issue too. We kind of had two separate lives. And I was traveling hardcore down this ministry mission route, and she was going down a very different path with her profession and helping people and doing things and
Sure.
being a doctor and all that kind of stuff. Just different lives, and just gotten distance and more distance and more distance, and eventually it kind of came to a point. It's like, what are we doing? And so anyway, that decided that overall the best thing to do would be uh, divorce and try something else. And
Yeah.
she's remarried, I'm remarried. Like, things seem to have gone really, really well for both of us.
Sure.
It's not a path I would suggest anyone take.
Yeah.
I would encourage someone to have a little more thought and discernment on the front end of that, so you don't have to go through the back end. But
Yeah.
so anyway, you met me then I was in a much better place. So a lot of that kind of fallout was
Mhm.
is on me. Like, I take 100% responsibility for the whole thing. I think that's another thing that a lot of times when people go through the end of a relationship, end of a marriage, they blame the other person, and then they don't fix anything. The majority of people who
Right.
have been divorced get divorced again, right? That's why the divorce rate is so high. People talk about, oh, it's 50% divorce rate. Well, if you take out people who have been divorced already, that rate changes, because after you've been divorced, you're much more likely to get divorced again and divorced. Like, it's a crazy exponential pattern. And so knowing that, I was like,
Mhm.
okay, let me step back. I got to fix everything because it's all my fault. Like, whether it is or not, it doesn't matter. I am going to take on the responsibility of all this. And so I spent
Yeah.
months and months of just getting away and stepping back. At the time, I was working over 100 hours a week. I was living on the streets.
Mhm.
I was downtown constantly. I was judging every other Christian, every other person that worked at the church I worked at, because they didn't do enough, they didn't work hard enough. All the spiritual pride that had built up in me, because I, in a lot of ways, took a football mentality into ministry of, I'm going to be the best. I'm going to hold myself to a higher standard. I'm going to, work hard, work. But that's not necessarily,
Work hard work. I was fixing to
yeah,
say work hard
and that's
work.
it.
Yeah.
But that can be dangerous, and it can ruin you, and you can end up doing a
Mhm.
whole lot of stuff for you and for pats on the back and for people to tell you how great you are, and not actually for the kingdom, not actually for service to other people, service of Jesus. Like, it's about me, and that's kind of what I ran into. And yeah, a lot of good things happened, and a lot of people were helped, and a lot of people got off the streets, and a lot of like amazing things in
Yeah.
spite of me. But
Yeah.
I had to reassess, and I had some really amazing pastors and people in my life. Talking about community, I had people that were willing to tell me the truth and to help walk me through this process of tearing everything down and rebuilding it from the ground up, of going into the kind of the deeper, darker, ugly parts of my
Wow.
heart and my soul, and saying, okay, God, shine a
Yeah.
light on anything that needs to be fixed, and let's go through this painful process of surgery, basically, and let's cut these things out and let's start over. And the
Yeah.
divorce was kind of like the giant flashing red light that this needed to happen. Um, the warning signs were already there previously. It's not like this magical, but
Yeah.
that was kind of the oh crap moment of going, all right, okay, let's
Hmm.
get this figured out. And so I spent months of just um, rest and figuring it out, and prayer and study and avoiding anything that even looked like a woman. Like I was just like, let's just
Yeah.
tear it all down. Um,
Yeah.
and then right after that process, I kind of got to a place where I felt like I was on the other side of it and really feeling good and talking to pastors, and people were like, okay, maybe it's time to kind of start thinking about what is it like to date again? What is it like to try to pursue another relationship? And it wasn't long after that I ended up on a mission
Yeah.
trip to Honduras that I wasn't supposed to be on. That my boss was supposed to go on. That he was going to lead this team to Honduras, and they were going to be there for like 10 days and do all this stuff at this orphanage. And I was really excited for him to go, but I had no desire to leave the country. Um, they don't play the right kind
Yeah.
of football. They don't speak English. They don't have Chick-fil-A. So I was like, I'm good, man. Y'all have fun down there. And I
Yeah.
can't tell you where Honduras is on a map. Good luck. But he had a family emergency pop up like 3 days before they left, and so he ends up coming over to my desk. He gets off the phone. He finds out, oh, I got to go handle this thing. Walks right over to my desk. He's like, hey man, what are you doing next week? I'm like, nuh-uh, I'm not going to Honduras. He's like, you're going to Honduras. Go pack a bag. Go write a sermon. Go figure this stuff out. And
Yeah.
so I ended up in Honduras. We get there, and then the day after we arrive, I end up meeting the woman that I'm now married to, who is also from Alabama. She was a missionary down there. She'd been there for several years already. I had to go to Honduras to meet a girl from Alabama, and we've been married 9 years at this point. We have 4 kids, and so
Yeah.
it's a wild ride, man. But a lot of it comes down to, I think it's Carl Jung who said, "That which you most need will be found where you least want to look," and that was kind of
Mm.
the story of that process of going
Hmm.
through hell, and having to go into these deep dark places I didn't really want to be in. I didn't want to look in, but you know, that's where I had to go to be able to find the things I needed to find, to be able to fix and change and give up to God and uh, eventually get to a healthy place on the back end. So you met me then. You met me when I was in a much healthier
Yeah.
place.
Yeah. But I mean, and when I met you, you were, I mean, you slept on a cot in that outdoor breezeway room at St. Philip,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, which I thought was the coolest thing. I was like, I would like to live vicariously through this
Yeah.
guy because you know what I mean. Because you're in a stage which you have two more children, but you're in a stage right now, kind of where I was
Mhm.
then ish, and so wife, kids, obligations, and stuff. But then I lead a group there. I'll never forget Ashley Waldrop. I don't know if you remember
Oh yeah.
Ashley, but God works. God works through relationships, right? So we had led several youth groups to the Hinton Rural Life Center, which is where I met the group so the church that I'm pastoring now in Middle Missouri, a youth group from here was at Hinton when our youth group from South Georgia was at Hinton, and these relationships formed. Um, but one of the summer staffers there was a girl named Ashley Waldrop, and we all became friends. And then several years later, Ashley actually chaperoned her younger brother's mission trip, group from North Carolina who came to M25. And immediately when she got home from that trip, Ashley called me, and she was like, we had been friends for several years at that point. And, she said, there's a guy in Atlanta, and you got to meet him, and you need to take a group to do this type of ministry. And so just from my trust in her and knowing her heart for Jesus, we acted on it. And so in that first group, dude, it was me, Brooke, Charity, Connor, Mindy, it was the whole gang in that first year at St. Philip when we came. And yeah, I just remember um, observing you and listening to your heart and being like, this guy, um, I wish that every professing Christian had a heart willing to journey through like you, and hearing bits and pieces of your story as you would teach at night, stuff that you would share when it was just a couple of us sitting around. And so anyway, it made a huge impression on me. That was what, 20, I don't even know, 2012 or 13, maybe 14. I don't know. I can't remember. Do you
That
remember?
would have been probably 2013.
13. And here we are 10 years later. And so it's interesting. We talked about this on the phone the other day, but when I decided to do this podcast this way, I sat down and made a list of people in my phone, and you're on that list. And I kind of put them in kind of groups of 10. And I had it kind of on my list to reach out to you. And a couple Saturdays ago, we were watching Zeke run cross country, and I got a message from you. And uh, again, with your heart, you had seen that we were doing this, and you just offered, hey, I've got a show. I've been doing this for 6 or 7 years, whatever you told me, and if I can do anything to help you, equip you, and keep you from falling in the same holes I have, I'm here. And so just super cool and sweet. And yeah, I mean, we still talk about you, about Beck, stories about Corey and that. But so 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 you're running M25, which is in Atlanta, and then you go on this mission trip to Honduras, and there you meet Brandy. She was there full time,
Right.
like living
Yep.
in country. Um, and she was in the process of adopting two girls, if I got that
Yeah.
right. And so then talk us through how you end up splitting your time, but predominantly, other than summers, living in an orphanage in Honduras. I mean, you talk about obedience and sacrifice. Like talk through that process, like from the time you met, then how things kind of work out, and the next thing you know, you're living down there.
Yeah. So, I met her in that, I can't remember if it was 7 or 10 days that we were there, but she was in charge of the baby house on that campus. There's about 500 kids there at this organization, and she was in charge of like 20 babies, and there's a few teenage moms that live there in the house with their kids, and so she was kind of the overseer of all that. And it's so funny. Miss Susan, who was this sweet little lady that was on our mission team, it was so funny. I was in charge of this mission trip, but I was the youngest person there by like 25 years. Like, this was like a retired folk trip, because it was in September, everybody's in school. And so you had all these like older folks, and
Yeah.
I'm in charge. I'm preaching, like, this is weird. I'm leading the Bible studies at night. I'm like, okay, let's figure it out. But anyway, Miss Susan, she loved the baby house. And so she would go there and just hold babies the entire time she was there. She's like, y'all go do the painting and the building and all that. I'm going to go hold babies. And it was right after church
Mhm.
on a Sunday morning. And she's like, Gabe, we don't have lunch for about an hour. Come with me. Let me show you my happy place. And so we're walking over, and as we're all kind of leaving church, we catch up to some of the people walking in that direction, and there's a woman there, and she's very pretty, and she's American, and she's holding a little Honduran baby. And someone asks about the baby. She's like, "Oh, this is my daughter." And I'm like, "Okay, there's a story in there somewhere. There's no wedding ring. I'm curious. Like, I'm
Yeah.
just interested. Like, what is the story here?" One thing about me, I'm always interested in story. Like, let's figure this out. Always,
Always.
man.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And anyway, we get to the baby house, and I realize, oh, she's in charge of this place. And so I walk up to her, introduce myself, say, hey, my name's Gabe. And oh, I'm okay. I'm Brandy. And I was like, I'm curious. Like, how'd you get here? Can you tell me like anything about your story or anything like that? And she said, no. She's like, I'm busy. I got to feed 25 babies. I'm like, understood. So she's like, here. And she hands me a baby, and she hands me like a bowl of food. She's like, feed him. If you want to do something, feed him. I'm like, okay, didn't come here expecting to feed babies, but here I am.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how it started. And she didn't want anything to do with me, man. She was like, I'm busy. I got stuff going on. You're on a mission team. There's 40 teams that come through this place every single year. They all come and go. And everybody talks about, oh, I want to do more and do this and be here long term. Like, nobody stays. Everybody leaves. You're just another one of those. And so that's how it started. And
Yeah.
over the next few days, we would just run into each other, and I would just strike up a conversation. And that's just kind of how it all started. And after the trip, started just through email and Skype calls and nothing serious, just trying to like figure out, okay, let's get to know each other. And that was about a year of that. And all of a sudden I had more inclination to go overseas. So I made a lot more trips to Honduras over the next several months, and I got hooked up with some other churches, other mission teams, and went down there, and it just all worked out. And so we got married roughly a year, almost to the day after we met, and so September to September.
Wow.
And she made a couple trips to Atlanta and met my folks and my friends, and so it was just kind of a wild adventure. But again,
It worked out. It worked out. We happened to be there
mhm.
one of our weeks with you. Brandy
Oh
flew in
yeah,
because I remember being at the Chick-fil-A.
yep,
It was Chick-fil-A night. We went to Chick-fil-A, and Brandy. We all got to meet Brandy, and everybody was
yeah,
ecstatic. That we got a chance to meet her.
yeah. She's excellent, as good as it gets. And now we have two more
Yeah.
kids, and so part of the reason we were in Honduras for so long, we were trying to move back a little sooner, but the adoption process took 8 years to finish. And part of that was COVID. COVID pushed it back. We were almost done, and then COVID pushed it back another 2 years. And just kind of that fight, that everyday battle of going through the legal system and all the craziness that goes on. Anytime you're doing anything in kind of a developing nation, you might say, things get a little wild.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish it had been as easy as I just needed to find the right person to give money to. It wasn't like that. I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
find anybody to bribe. It was just a lot of incompetence and
Mm-hmm.
people that unfortunately don't
Yeah.
seem to care as much about children as maybe they should, which that's anywhere you go. I find that here more and more in the United States, where you've got all these systems that are in place to help people that don't necessarily help people. But that's a whole nother conversation. But so that's the
Yeah.
story with Brandy. But let's back up for a second. So you mentioned St. Philip, and the
Yeah.
reason I ended up at St. Philip was also because of the divorce. I don't know if you know this. So St. Philip was a kind of a sister partner church of the big church I used to work for in Marietta, right outside Atlanta, and it was a church that had basically failed. The community around it
Mm-hmm.
had changed, but the church had not changed, and so all these like blue collar, middle class white folks that made up that church, all those jobs disappeared as everything went overseas, as everything kind of moved away. The jobs left, the people left. The church never changed, and as the community became more Hispanic and more black, the church still tried to be this middle class white church, and so
Mm-hmm.
eventually your 90-year-old people die, and then you don't have a church anymore, which is kind of what a lot of denominations are running
Mm-hmm.
into. And so the United Methodist Church, like the conference, came to the church I work for and like, hey, can you help revitalize this place? And so they started kind of putting money there and trying to do these different programs. And at first, it started off as like, oh, we'll just bus our white people over to there. Like, well, amazingly, it didn't work. Who could have known? Who could have known?
Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
then they had the bright idea to be like, well, why don't we actually reach out to the people in this community? It's like, we'll see what happens. And that's where Corey, who you
Yeah.
mentioned, who he was the worship leader there and kind of became the youth director at the same time. He started having these events and bringing in all these high school kids. It was right next to a pretty big, pretty major high school. And so, he started
Mm-hmm.
having 150 kids coming in on a Tuesday night for dinner and Bible study, which was mind boggling, and all these amazing things started happening. And then M25 started going over there on Thursday nights, and we started plugging into the community and doing different things because it's in a pretty rough part of Atlanta. One of the most
Yeah. Yeah.
violent, one of the
Yeah.
most dangerous areas, and then you have this church right there, which is kind of a perfect place for a church, if you ask me. But anyway, so we started doing stuff with Mission Camp. Well, then, okay, back to my relationship issue. The divorce happens, and the guy that was kind of over the youth department, not the youth director, but kind of like he was the pastor that was like an overseer of the youth ministers and like all the youth volunteers and all that kind of stuff. He didn't know me. He'd never had a conversation with me, but he decreed that I was not allowed to do anything that had anything to do with youth. So I was gonna like lead a life group. I was gonna lead some Bible studies. Like I was already on schedule to do all these different things, and he yanked me off of that. Didn't even talk to me about it. He's like, go tell him. Didn't even tell me himself. Like sent somebody to tell me, which was a kind of a
Wow.
trend at that church, and that kind of an ugly thing. But he's also an Alabama fan, so I'm thinking that also maybe has something to do with it. But anyway, so come to find out, like I'm not allowed to do any of the things that I thought I was
Specifically because of the
because of the
divorce.
divorce. And again, there's no nuance.
Man.
It was just a black and white, oh, you went through a divorce, therefore you're not allowed to do X, Y, and Z. It's like, do you know
Yeah.
anything
Yeah.
about the
Yeah.
situation? Do you know anything about what happened or how or why or when or what? Like, you don't know anything. You're just like making a knee jerk reaction for no real apparent reason. And so, anyway, I went to him because if you're going, I mean, we're gonna have a conversation. Like if you're gonna, if you're gonna do that, I'm gonna come to your office. I'm not even gonna knock. I'm gonna let myself in. I'm gonna sit down in front of you. I'm gonna put my feet up on your desk, and I'm gonna have a conversation because you want to act like that.
Yeah.
Okay, well let's go to the next level. And so we're having this conversation, and I'm just asking, well, can I do this? No. Can I do that? No. Can I do this over here? No. I said, what about St. Philip? Can I drive across town and do Bible studies and life groups with those kids? He goes, yeah, that would be okay. Oh, okay. Okay. So I'm not allowed to be with the little middle and upper class white kids over on this part of town. But if I want to go over there where you've got drug addicts and drug dealers and gangs and all this kind of stuff, yeah, go be over there. Interesting. Interesting. Okay.
Mm.
So that's what I did. And several days a week, I would drive across town and I plugged in over there. And it was one of the biggest blessings of my entire life.
Amen, man.
And that's another thing I've just learned over the years is God is a so that God. A lot of times we get so caught up in these bad things that are happening, and we fail to take a step back and look at it and go, "Oh, these good things are happening, or these bad things are happening, so that God can redeem and reconcile and bring amazing, beautiful, wonderful things from it." Divorce is always going to be bad. Cancer is always going to be bad. Car wrecks and being mistreated at church, those things will always be negative and awful and bad. But God will redeem those things and bring good from them if we're just willing to trust Him, walk in faith, go to the new place that maybe you don't even want to be at originally. Maybe it turns into the biggest blessing of your life. That's where I met Corey. He and I became best friends. That's why Mission Camp moved over there, which is one of the best things that ever happened to it as an organization. One of the best things that ever happened to any of the teams that came in, to be able to plug right in to that community, to the people that were right there. It turned out to be phenomenal. And, all because of some kind of shady, unfortunate things going on in the leadership of a church. And, a lot of times we want to walk away. We want to give up on church, give up on God and go, screw it. But I just want to encourage anybody that goes through that. It's like, it ain't God. Jesus ain't the problem, and to just keep going, keep walking in faith.
But a big piece of that, though, is that process of catharsis. I mean, it's going through. So I guess what I'm leaning into is the reason that you were able to do that. The reason is because of the season that you had just come out of personally, spiritually, being willing to dive into the muck and the mire, being willing to take ownership of any part or piece of what had taken place. And like, okay, this has happened. Can't change that, but let's open up and figure out what I need to solve or what God needs to solve in me so that this isn't a cycle. Right. And then you go through that process and you end up with poor leadership. I don't know, because I didn't know pre-Gabe, but pre-Gabe may not have been open to going to St. Philip or doing some of these other things, but post Gabe. So yeah, I mean, I think it is God bringing, birthing new life out of brokenness. But I also believe a gigantic piece of that part is the heart of the believer.
Absolutely.
I think that when we're in this posture, in that humility and brokenness to a degree, when we own our junk, that making money from mud happens a lot different than it does if we haven't been through some of that fire.
One of the biggest learnings of my entire life, and I tell anyone in ministry this, I tell people in general this, is when I learned that God does more in spite of me than because of me. And the more I can just get out of the daggum way and let God do His work and let me just be part of it in some, again, cleaning bathrooms and taking out trash, like whatever it is, that God's going to bring amazing things Himself, not because of me, not because I'm in control, not because I get the last word, I get the final say. And so over the years, I've learned more and more to open my hand as much as possible, right? And stop holding on to things. The harder I hold on to things, when it gets ripped out, whether it's by life or by me or by God Himself, like when it gets ripped out of my hand and I got that strong grip, man, it hurts. Man, there's some pain in there. But when I got an open hand, that one, it doesn't hurt as bad, but also another thing is when my hand is closed, God can't put anything else in it. This is all I got, but when I've got that open hand,
Yeah.
things can come and go freely, and some really cool things can happen because of that. And just seeing God move and do things that I've initially was like, this is a bad idea. We're going to do it because I feel like this is what we're supposed to do. But God, this is dumb. Let me put it on the record. Hey, let me put up a prayer and let you know that I think this is stupid and this is not going to work.
Yeah.
And then on the backside, it becomes one of the best things we've ever done. And best example of that. So M25, this was year 2. So this is before I had really built up all my contacts and relationships, like knowing all the organizations downtown. Like it got to a point where no matter what happened, like no matter who canceled or no matter what time or day or anything changed, I was so flexible eventually because I had so many relationships. It'd be like, don't worry about it. I've got 10 other people I can call. We'll figure something out. Like that's where I kind of got to that point. Early on, that was not the case. Early on, it was Safe House and it was Seven Bridges, and it was like very, very limited to what we were going to be doing that week. And second year, we had an opportunity to get canceled on us for Thursday. I find out like Sunday afternoon that Thursday's opportunity is canceled. We can't go there and do the thing. Like, okay, that's frustrating. Let me figure it out. And I had like 50 people on this mission team. Like it's a pretty big group. So I got a lot of figuring out to do. And Monday morning, I call everybody on my small list. I'm like, hey, nothing but no's. Okay, no, sorry, we can't. Sorry, no, so no. All right. Okay, Monday afternoon, I get my staff together. I'm like, okay, we got a few days to figure this out. What do y'all think? What's some ideas? We're just spitballing, coming up with this and that. We could go over here and do this. Like, I'm not feeling it. And then just in this like brainstorming session, I said, what if we did like a carnival? Like, what if we went to one of the parks downtown and we set up some games, and folks experiencing homelessness would come in, play the games, they win prizes, socks and candy bars and hygiene kits and stuff like that. And as soon as I said it, I immediately went, no, that's a really stupid idea. Disregard that.
That's dumb.
That's dumb.
Yeah.
And my staff looked at me and they're like, no, we think you got something. And they got excited. And they're like, we could do this. And they started running with it. And I'm like, whoa. We're not doing homeless people Chuck E. Cheese. Like, this is a bad idea. And they were all excited about it. And, we prayed about it. And I was like, this is dumb. It's not going to work. It's a terrible idea. But we didn't have anything else. So I was like, all right, let's figure it out. And so we put together these little kind of thrown together, junkified games. And we started telling people throughout the week, hey, we're going to be in Hurt Park Thursday at this time. Come on, we're going to have this like carnival type thing. And, the group's getting excited about it. They're this group from Florida. And so anyway, we get on the bus Thursday morning. We're driving to this park downtown. And I remember one of the leaders on this team, she turns to me. She says, Gabe, how many people do you think are going to show up? Like, she was a realist. She was like, let's be real. This is a dumb idea. I'm aware that we're all, the adults in the room, we know this is silly. And she's like, how many people do you think actually, like, just be honest, how many are going to show up? And I said, if we could have 10 people, like double digits, I'd feel pretty good about that. 10 whole people. And she was like, okay. So we get downtown, we get to the park, and this is a park that is never occupied, never used. It's a rinky-dink part. The fountain in the middle doesn't work. It's just not a good spot, which is why I chose it, because it's like we don't have to worry about anybody being there because nobody wants to be there. So we can have the park to ourselves, and hopefully we can get some folks to show up. Okay, we get there, and the park is completely occupied by some kind of corporate event. There's tents, there's music, there's food, there's like all these things happening in this park that no one ever uses. And immediately everybody on that team, 50 people, are looking at me like, hey, this is part of the plan, right? Like, right, yes. And so I was like, y'all hang tight. Let me go figure this out. And so I go down, we park, I go down to the park, we park the bus, I go into the park. And I find the lady in charge, Miss Brown. And Miss Brown worked for the United Way. And as we're chatting, she said, oh, we're doing this big HIV testing event, mainly focused on people experiencing homelessness. So we've got all these different services and all these different things set up. These tents are for folks on the street. I'm like, oh, amazing, because we're here to help with homeless folks too. And we've got this carnival. And she's like, oh, she got super excited. She said, we're going to make this work. And she gave us a spot over in the shade underneath all these trees. And we set up our games and we played carnival games and gave away hygiene kits and socks and sodas and all kind of stuff for hours and hours and hours. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people came through. We gave away
Wow.
everything. And to see people smile and laugh and play these games and talk trash and just kind of have this experience, right? Because you can go on the street and just throw stuff at people. You know, you can go, you get a hygiene kit,
Yeah.
you get a hygiene kit, and you get a sandwich. Like you can go out and do that. And 20 minutes, you can give away all your stuff. But to create an event that inspired joy and fun and accomplishment, right? If you're living on the streets, you don't get to feel like you're a winner very often. You don't feel like, hey, I won that. And so to provide that for folks and to have people come up and say, this guy over here, I've been on the streets, years. I've never seen that guy over there smile, and he can't stop smiling today. And to be part of that,
Wow.
and to get back to the church later and kind of assess and debrief, and to go, I thought this was the dumbest idea in the world, and again, in spite of me, not because of me, right? That God was like, let's go do this thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
and experiencing that kind of stuff. The more you experience it, the more you just realize, get out of the way. Just get out of the way. Be
Mhm.
part of it. Be
Mhm.
some little side note, footnote or whatever. But let God work. Let God cook, as the kids say nowadays. Let
Yeah.
Him cook.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, in that same vein, some of probably the one of the strongest memories I have from our time with you was karaoke
Yeah.
in the atrium at Gateway Center.
Mhm.
And setting up the nails somewhere. One of Charity Lucas's favorite pictures to pull out is me painting some lady's nails,
Right.
and but that is non-conventional. It's not cracking your van window. I remember you
Yeah.
telling the stories about churches that would ride up and crack their van windows and enough to shove Ziploc baggies of ham sandwiches
Right.
out. A lot of that you talk about how you're infatuated with story and love story, and you're a storyteller, and so in that season of life, a lot of those stories stuck. It stuck with me, and I think about them often. But that non-conventional, making somebody smile, um, playing the games, giving stuff away, singing karaoke, allowing people to be
Right.
human, um, that dignity, just eye contact, sitting down over a stack of
Yep.
pancakes and listening to a story, or running, uh, running a candlestick this big through the middle of the pancakes to sing somebody happy
Yep.
birthday because we don't have birthday candles, and um, loving people well and not just checking a box.
Right.
So there's somewhere that I want to go, and it's you and I started to get into this a smidge the other night, and I was like, "Whoa, don't use your bullets because that is
Yeah.
gold." But before we go there, because I think that'll probably carry us out just through the rest of our time that we have allotted, to kind of complete the story with Brandy and Honduras. So you end up down there, you all marry, you end up down there in country long enough. I mean, 8 years, right? Did you say
8 years. Yep.
years? So, so that you could adopt the
Right.
girls. Um, and then after the adoption is complete, then you move back to the
Yeah.
States.
So we moved back last March. So we've been here about a year and a half.
Wow. So your biological children, were they born in
In Honduras.
Honduras or in the
All four of my
States?
kids are legally citizens of Honduras.
How cool, man. Pretty cool. Um, uh, and I don't know, was part of the lag. So I've as close as I've been to Honduras is, there's a tribe that we spent time with in the Nicaraguan rainforest, but we went 12 hours up a river by boat. It's the Coco River that separates Nicaragua and
Mhm.
Honduras. So as much as I know about Honduras is stepping out of the boat on the Honduras side to take a
Yeah.
leak. Um, but what I do know, I spent a lot of time in Nicaragua, and I know that there were American shell companies that were adoption agencies, and there was corruption, and it was a money deal. And so, was Honduras cracking down on American adoption agencies like Nicaragua was? Was that part of what you got caught up in, or was it something altogether
Well,
different?
that was happening, but luckily that was kind of I was grandfathered in, so that happening didn't affect my adoption.
Okay.
Honestly, the only time I ran into
Okay. Good.
corruption was when we had one of the directors, one of the higher ups at the kind of what we would call like child services, right in the United States. that equivalent in
Okay.
Honduras. We had one of the higher ups basically contact us and say, if you give me a certain amount of money, I will put you at the front of this list. And I was like, okay. And and we had some friends that did it. They paid, and I just didn't. I was
Wow.
like, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, and we didn't do it. And like a week or two later, that guy got found out, and he lost his job, and that put everything else into disarray. And another weird thing about the system is you have to, when you have a certain level of like director job in the government, you have to be there a certain amount of time for your
Hmm.
signature to actually carry weight. Right. So in our context, imagine if the president gets sworn in January and isn't allowed to sign a law that matters until midsummer. Right. That's kind of like, so you have
Wow.
everything that kind of stacks up for that waiting period for this
Hmm.
person. And I don't know if it's some kind of like making sure this is the right person. It's not all corrupted. Like there's probably some reason why they did that, but that cost 6 months, right? That now everything just got put on pause
Wow.
for an extra 6 months because this guy was corrupt. And now luckily the system said, hey, that's corruption, and got it out of there. That's cool. But for the most part, it was just everything, nothing was worth getting in a hurry about from the government side, right? It's almost like there's just not an incentive. Like no one really cares enough to push things forward. And then you combine that with
Right.
a lack of financial resources, where some of the people in the government system didn't have access to a vehicle. And so if they needed to go to like your house to do a home study to make sure you're a viable parent, you're not abusive, and you've got beds and food and
Hmm.
refrigerator and all that kind of stuff, they didn't have a way to get to you. So like sometimes you'd have to go drive to them, pick them up, bring them to your house, show them around, and then take them back to the office. And so it's stuff like that, right? Where they just didn't
Wow.
have access to things that we would consider mundane and normal. And the
Wow.
same with every country. You have a handful of people trying to do a mountain worth of work. Same with social work here in the States, where you've
Hmm.
got so few and so much to do. So it was a
Hmm.
combination of all these different factors, and it just took. And then COVID, so 2.5 years extra, 2.5 years. So
Wow.
all that together, man.
So 8 years, 8 years you lived in Honduras.
Correct.
Wow. Okay, so doubling back then, so a couple things that I want to talk about. One, churches serving neighborhoods that they find themselves in.
Right.
Number two, and I shared this with you the other day just on our call, I've grown to the point that I despise the term church hurt.
Yeah.
Um, I don't I don't deny that people are hurt by churches. Um, I think in a lot of ways, though, in a lot of ways, I think it's a cop out at times
I
too.
agree.
Um, so I really want to talk just a little bit because this will be gold. Um, churches, churches getting over themselves and beginning to serve neighborhoods that they find themselves in. Church hurt, leading to people who love Jesus but don't love the
Right.
church. And so, as a person who spent a long time, years and years and years of my life serving young people, youth, college, career age, many of which um, still love Jesus desperately, but are have grown disenchanted with the church. Um, and several, I mean, I have several calls a month from young adults, 20 somethings, um, who are in this place where they're trying to find somewhere to worship and they can't, it's just not clicking. So, um, let's start with churches serving their neighborhood. So you talked about St. Philip, and that's a snapshot. I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of churches in that scenario right this moment, and it's the unwillingness, like like you said, it's the unwillingness to open those hands, and relinquish control, which is a facade, right? Control's a hoax. um, to relinquish control and just kick the doors open and be like, okay, this is the situation that we find ourselves in. The text says, love your neighbor as yourself, ourselves. Who is our neighbor? You know, let's open the front doors and kind of take a look around. Not the people who are commuting 20 minutes in to get to us because this is their grandfather and great grandmother's church. Like, what is the climate of the neighborhood that we're situated in? I'd be interested to know, A, your thoughts on that. B, how do we go about encouraging people um, to get uncomfortable
Right.
and to serve the neighborhoods that they find themselves
Yeah.
in.
So first thing popped in my mind when you said uncomfortable is so often we tell ourselves and we tell other people, we tell opportunities, oh, that's not my wheelhouse. Oh, I don't know how to do that. Oh, I'm not good at that. Oh, that's not my love language. Whatever it is, right? And I heard this pastor talking about one time. She said, "There's only one love language, and it's die to self." Like that's your love language is die to self and figure out how you serve and get over yourself to your what you were saying earlier. But so often
Yeah.
as church folks, we pray that God would bring us more members, more people to be part of it, younger people, whatever. And then when he does, we often have a tendency to go, "Oh, not those people, not them. We wanted someone else."
Yeah.
It's like, goodness gracious, and that's actually kind of what happened in my wife's situation. So my wife grew up very tough scenario. Grew up in the projects. Her dad died when she was, I think, 9. Mom was a drug addict.
Oh no.
My wife went through a lot of really terrible things as a young person, as a child, and didn't want anything to do with church, but didn't really know anything about church either. And she had this group of friends that they found out that a church close to where they were all kind of living served breakfast on Sunday morning, and they were hungry, and so they started showing up at this church to eat breakfast, right, as a place for some food. And these were a rough group of kids. These were drugs and alcohol and sex and violence, and like these were not the people that you're like, oh, I can't wait to have more of these folks in our church. Like they're some rough folks. But the youth pastor
Mm-hmm.
there recognized that this was the answered prayer. That we were praying God would bring more people in, more youth to the youth program, and here they are. And he got so excited. But the church leadership was pissed. They were like, "We don't want these people," And a lot of the kids in the youth group that had been there a long time, they stopped coming because all those kids started coming.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this youth pastor, though, he just doubled down and he just started leaning into what God was doing. And I mean, so many of those kids came to know the Lord. A lot of them got into ministry. A lot of them turned their lives around. Not all, you know.
Wow.
Still plenty of. It's hard to get out of that vacuum. Um, but
Yeah.
this youth pastor became this solid rock for these kids.
Mm-hmm.
And but it started with pizza and breakfast. Pizza on Wednesday nights and breakfast on Sunday mornings, and that's what got kids in the door. Was we're going to feed them because they don't know anything about church. And my wife, you know, um, she was in a rough spot, and I remember. So to fast forward the story, that youth pastor ends up adopting my wife when she was a teenager. So that youth pastor is
Wow.
now my
Wow.
father-in-law, and so to hear him, he'd be a
What?
good one to have on this show, man, and just talk through it all because he's got some stories to tell, dude. And
We need to do that.
I'll hook
Yeah.
y'all
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
He's phenomenal,
Okay.
and the way he'll tell you the story. It's like Brandy had this just darkness in her heart of like, why would I run to Jesus when he's never run to me?
Wow.
Like he's never shown up for me. What do I care about him? That's where she started. And then fast forward several years of just pouring into and loving on her and helping her reconcile and get through all this stuff from her past. And she ends up as a missionary in Honduras, taking care of all these babies. And, like God does amazing things
Mm-hmm.
when, as a church and as people of the church, like to your point, we're willing to be uncomfortable, to not even worry
Mm-hmm.
about, like, for comfort to not even be part of our vocabulary. Like that shouldn't even really be a conversation. Like who cares?
Yeah. Yeah.
Jesus said, pick up your cross
Yeah.
and follow me. What part of that has anything to do with comfort or anything like that?
He doesn't say. Yeah. Yeah. He doesn't say what preference. What are your preferences for the color of carpet
Exactly.
that you're following me
Right.
on? Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I
I'm
think
with you.
that's
Yeah.
that's the issue, right? It's just how do we live that out daily in our context, in our neighborhood? Sometimes God calls you to go across the world. Most of the time God calls you to go across the street. Like that's just
Yeah.
what it is. And and it doesn't. Another thing that bothered me, living in Honduras or doing the mission work in Atlanta, people would put you on a pedestal. They would think, oh, this is some special person. It's like, well, no, God may have called me to a place that you can't fathom, and God might have put me in a situation where you don't want to be in, and that's fine. But God's calling all of us. We're all missionaries. Whether you have to leave home or not,
Mm-hmm.
we're all called to a certain context, to a certain household. I tell kids all the time, it's like the hardest people to love are the people you share a bathroom with. How do you love them?
Mm-hmm.
What's,
Mm-hmm.
what's the phrase? Everybody wants to change the world. Nobody wants to wash dishes. Like, how do you just go home and wash dishes and do these
Yeah.
little things? Because that's what changes the
Yeah.
world. Another quote is, if you want to change your city, change your doorstep. That's where it starts. And if we all change our doorsteps, all of a sudden cities change,
Mm-hmm.
but we always want to make it these big, grand gestures. It's like, it's not. It's pancakes on a
Yeah.
Sunday morning. It's pizza on a Wednesday night. It's little things and just giving people the opportunity. Another thing is, the church used to be this amazing third space, right? Not at home, not at work,
Mm-hmm.
but these third spaces that we don't necessarily have as much anymore, right? We don't have the Rotary clubs and all the different
Mm-hmm.
organizations, and everything's online now. And as wonderful as that is, social media is not particularly social. It's parasocial. It's not real. Like, you're not in the same room with people, and it's just a different thing. And, you know, as people have gotten more and more in themselves, the church has become less and less a viable third space, which I think we need to figure out ways to
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
bring more people in the door, right? Whether we're doing little events or I don't know, daycares, like different things to like take care of people more than just an hour on a Sunday morning through a worship service, right? How do we do that effectively
Mm-hmm.
and love people where they're at in the year we're actually living in? A lot of times church is trying to do church like 1997. It's like, it's not 97 anymore. It's 2023. And so
Right.
how do we do that effectively? And anyway, that's kind of where my
Mm-hmm.
heart is. It's like, there is no answer. There's no like, oh, I've got the solution. It's
Yeah.
nuance in your community, your space. You're figuring it out. You're the people around you, and then just go from there. And then don't be mad when God brings you exactly what you've been praying for. Like, lean into it.
Yeah. Those people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I was having a conversation with a friend of mine last year. I think I don't know the time all runs together. It may have been the year before, but we were talking about how, so the purpose-driven model, the 1990s, the purpose-driven craze hits, and this kind of "if you build it, they will
Yeah.
come" mantra, and so churches began, and it's kind of that third space. Starbucks built an
Yep.
empire on third space mentality. But that's where you started to see the coffee shops and the bookstores and the enormous atriums and gathering spaces. And I'm not knocking that at all. But we found ourselves in this place where that pendulum has
Right.
swung, and no longer can we operate as the church of "if you build it, they will come," right? And so, as with everything, especially in the North American church, we're in a lag, so we're behind. um, and the rest of society has begun to understand that it's no longer "if you build it, they'll come." Like, we have to begin to go and meet people where they are, to serve people how they are, and where they are. And my hope, my desire, my prayer is that the church will expedite that process to try to catch up with the speed um, at which our society is moving and going and meeting
Yeah.
people, and whatever that looks like. Um, I think that people can get behind story, which I think is one reason why I like you so much, is because you're a genius storyteller and you love story. You love other people's stories. You're not ashamed or uh, at all reluctant to share your story. Um, but I think with young people, and tell me what you think about this, but we talk about people who love Jesus but don't love the church. Um, Part of that might be because we're not inviting them. Uh, we're wanting them to be part of our
Mm.
story instead of us going and saying, "How can we come alongside you in your
Yeah.
story?" Like, how can our stories merge? um, what do you think about
Yeah.
that?
When you tell the story properly, it changes the world. And what I mean by that
Mhm.
is, so often we try to sugarcoat's not necessarily the right word, water down in a lot of ways, Uh, we don't just tell the story as it is when it relates to Jesus. And what's crazy about that, in my mind, is that the actual story, this die to self, take on this other life, this new you, like it is an incredible call to adventure. And a lot of times we forget that part, and we focus on rules, do's and don'ts, and you got to do this, and you got to say this, and you got to wear that. And it's like that's not what Jesus did. When he walked up to those disciples, he said, "Do you want to go on an adventure? Come follow me." Now, had they known it was going to end up in most of them being martyred and die a slow, painful, agonizing death, like
Right.
I don't know, maybe they wouldn't have gone. But they were looking at this
Right.
opportunity, and this revolutionary, rebel, interesting, unique guy saying, "Hey, I think you're good enough. Let's go." And they went on this adventure, and their lives were unbelievable. And unfortunately, especially when it comes to young men, young men are so hard to find in the church right now. Like we are a women, female driven church, and there's a lot of good that comes with
Oh
that.
yeah.
But like we need more men in the church, and I feel like the reason we've lost them is because we lost the story, the adventure that it is to follow Jesus.
The adventure. Yeah.
And so telling that story as it is, you don't have to change it. You don't have to, like, the whole seeker driven thing bothers me so much because it's like, oh, we're going to change the story to get to, it's like, but why? But why? Because if you're telling it the way it is, you don't have to change it.
Yeah.
Like it's worked for 2,000 years. Like it's done a pretty good job of being a huge, making a big impact in the world. And now we're going to take the cross out of our sanctuaries. We're never going to talk about blood. It's like, if you just read scripture and you just do what it says,
Yeah.
and that's kind of my mentality. It's like, this is what Matthew 25 says. Okay, well, how do we live that out? And what does that look like
Yeah.
in a daily basis? So to your point, I think that's what we got to do is just, when I was playing football, if you have a bad game, it's not because the trick play you ran didn't work. It's not because this new fancy formation, didn't work. It's because you didn't block and you didn't tackle. That's why you lose. It's the basics, it's the fundamentals. And you know what? Next week, what we're going to do, guys? When we get to practice, we're going to spend a whole lot of time blocking and tackling because that's how you win. And with ministry and following Jesus, it's blocking and tackling. It's figuring out how to get people to be reconciled back to God. It's forgiveness. It's carrying your cross. Like it's all these basic things that we all know. It's common sense as far as if you've been in ministry for a long time. But we try to be fancy. We try to do trick plays. We try to do all these things. It's like just block and tackle.
Yeah.
Get back to the basics.
And the thing is, the younger generation knows, they sense it.
100%. They smell it miles away.
Their bullshit-o-meter is more in tune than any of the rest of us, and that they can sniff that out a mile away. And I think that's where, I say a lot, people aren't attracted to right; they're attracted to real. And it doesn't matter how right you are, but it does matter how real you
Right.
are. And it's interesting because my pastor friends and my churchy friends, they don't like when I say that. They're like, "Oh, it does matter how right you are, your theology, blah, 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 blah." And my heart's not in that. My heart's in when you're trying to connect with people who love Jesus but don't love the
Right.
church. They've got a relatively solid relationship individually, but corporately it's non-existent. If we can get back to this place of authenticity, of winning together and losing together, laughing together, crying together, ups, downs, ins, outs. If we can get to that place of just being real and doing life with people, I think that's a snapshot of the body of Christ.
Right.
And to your point about the adventure, it's kind of I'm let down because he was kind of a one-hit wonder in my mind, but John Eldridge, Wild at Heart, that book is so good. It's one of only a few books. I read it once a year, about the adventure and the heart, specifically of men. But yeah, so these young, and a lot of them are guys. There's a couple girls in there, but a lot of them are guys that are like, I know I need to connect. I want to connect, but It's just really, really hard. Um, and the simplified deal, back in the day, Gabe, like way back in the day at the very beginning, we had all these kids coming in and they were messed up as a football bat, man. They were just as confused. They were so confused about things. And we went to these kind of core questions. Do you believe that God is who he says he is? Do you believe that he can do in you, through the gospel of Jesus Christ, what he says he can? And are you willing to let him? Three very fundamental, basic, simple questions. And that was simplified at its core. And people would come with all these philosophies and all these things and all this other stuff, and we would constantly go back to this authenticity of, do you believe these things? And I, I think, especially in North America, I think the church could use a big healthy dose of that. Tell the story. Don't alter it. Don't tweak it or change it. Just tell the story. And go ahead.
No, finish what you're saying.
I was just going to say, in the church hurt piece, in the authenticity, to go when you get things wrong, go and sit down with somebody and say, hey, I messed up. Like, we got this wrong. That wasn't my heart. That wasn't my intention. But I take ownership of it. I realize that we did damage, and I'm asking you to forgive me. It's incredible what happens relationally when the church and representatives of the church humble ourselves, and we'll have that kind of dialogue with people. That's all I was going to say. I think it could go a long way.
Yeah. Brennan Manning wrote a book years ago, and I can't remember the name off the top of my head. I'll get it to you. I'll get you the title. It's one of the best books I've ever read. But it's like the unwavering love of God or something like that. It's like we're just talking about how much God loves.
The furious longing of
something
God.
like that. Yeah, that sounds right. And there's this chapter where he kind of breaks down everything as this Wild West metaphor. And, it gets kind of deep and, all these different things. But the one I love the most is when he talks about the role of the pastor. And when you're living out the story properly, in this Wild West metaphor, the pastor is like the cook on the trail. And the Holy Spirit is this like buffalo man. The Holy Spirit's out there, finding the stuff to bring to you, the wild fruits and berries and vegetables and the meats and all this kind of stuff. And then the cook, the pastor, he takes all that stuff the Holy Spirit's bringing him and he puts it together into this meal, and then he serves that out to the other people there on the trail. The cook's not better than anybody else on the trail. He's just the guy that happens to have the job of being the cook. He's in another wagon there like everybody else, and he just happens to have a skill set and has been given this position. And unfortunately, a lot of times in ministry, and I was definitely guilty of this early on, is you get to this place where you feel like you're above, you feel like you're better than, you get this kind of spiritual pride going. Mm-hmm. And then because of that, you can't admit you're wrong. Then because of that, you can't admit when you've hurt somebody. You can't go to them and reconcile because you've given yourself this space above, right? And so I think that's a big issue is, one, recognizing that the ground is level at the foot of the cross, and that's where we're all at. It's level. Whether you're a pastor of a mega church of 50,000 people or you're just some random person that sits on the back pew at a church with 10 people, we're all the same spot. And the humility that comes from that now opens up opportunities to have better relationships. Right. It's also the congregation's understanding that the pastor's not anybody special, right? That he has issues and his marriage has got problems and he's, doing things that he shouldn't and thinking things and saying things. And it's like, because we're all human, right? We're all in this together. And I think that's part of it too, is just telling that story properly, that there was one perfect man to walk this earth, and it ain't me. It ain't you. It's Jesus. And that's it. And he's the standard, and the standard doesn't change. But, we're just trying to all live that out and just being honest in our failings. I think that's another place where, you know, you look around, and you're like, because I remember growing up, I went to this little Baptist church with my grandparents, and I thought when I was a kid, I was like, oh man, I'm the only one messed up in this whole place. I'm looking around, all these people, they got it together, everything's good, they're all, you know, doing well. It must be me. It's something wrong with me. Now, come to find out, there's a whole bunch of people cheating on their wives, a whole bunch of people doing stuff and shady business practices. Like there was a lot of messed up people in that church. But, you know, and I'm not saying, oh, we got to go up to the front of the on a Sunday morning and be like, hey, I deal with this. And I seen that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying just that authenticity of being honest about our places in all of this, because then we can help each other. You know, if you know that we're right there side by side, then we can lock arms and try to travel down this road together. And so I think that's a big part of it is, like you're saying, being open, being honest when we're wrong, going to people, finding ways to reconcile. I mean, that's what Jesus came to do, right? He came to die for our sins and to reconcile us back to God. And when he left us that ministry. That's what it says in Scripture. He left us the ministry of reconciliation. That's the point. So if anything we're doing as a church is not pointing towards that mission and vision of Jesus and that ministry he left us, then what are we doing? If it's not somehow trying to reconcile people and ourselves back to God, maybe we've missed the point. But that's the adventure.
Yeah.
Right? That's the dragon you have to go slay. And to present it in those terms, because that's what it is. I think, because I was going to say earlier, is I think we're in the most religious time of American history. But the church continues to shrink because a lot of that religious fervor is going towards things that are secular, right? It's going towards a lot of these social justice movements, which, you know, a lot of good and bad in there, but there's no higher power. There's no deeper meaning. It's a lot of like politics and voting and tribal stuff, you know, my team versus your team. And because I got this belief about this topic and you got that belief about that. Like there's more religious acting right now than maybe ever before. But the church is kind of, we're not telling the story properly. And so we're kind of on the outside looking in. And I feel like if we can just kind of get the word out person to person, what does it look like for people to, because everybody's searching for meaning, you know, dudes are sitting around playing 8 hours a day of video games because they want to be a hero. They want to go kill the dragon. They want to save the girl. They want to do all this. They want to have meaning and some kind of deeper purpose in their lives, but they don't have it. And following Jesus is really the only thing that's going to give it to them. And so how do we, one, message that? But to do that, you got to get to know them. To do that, you got to get outside your church doors, your home doors. You got to get there and get to know people. And that's a whole nother topic of conversation, how to do that effectively. But I think that's the deeper thing is how do we provide the message, the story of that deeper purpose, that deeper meaning to the people around us, and then help them to come alongside us on this adventure. I think if we do that, even just a tiny fraction, right, all of a sudden things change in a big way.
Yeah, and that's so people aren't interested in the institution, but they're fascinated with the mission.
Yes.
You know, they're not overly. They don't. Most young people do not care about the institution. But I think if the invitation is right, several have the guts to step into the mission.
100%. Whether it's an actual mission, like, hey, we're going on this mission trip to this place. Love to have you come along.
Sure.
Hey, we've got this thing going on at the church.
Yeah.
And again, not just asking somebody to show up on a Sunday morning. There's nothing wrong with that. But like, how do you go deeper than that? You know, hey, come sit next to me as we sing some songs you don't know and don't care about, and you listen to a guy talk about stuff you don't care about, reading from a book you don't even believe. Like there's certain, invite people to worship. Yes. But there's a deeper opportunity to invite people along on the adventure. Now, first of all, though, that means you got to be on the adventure too. You can't invite somebody to go on a mission trip you ain't going on. Right? And so you got to be part of this thing too. And that's another thing we don't, once we get our fire insurance, we're like, I'm going to heaven, good enough, right? But it's like, no, like, what does it look like for, because I can't give what I don't have. And so if I'm not living this kind of deeper, more meaningful life, trying to find how to plug in and provide purpose to my life and follow Jesus and stuff. If I'm not doing that, it's really hard for me to invite somebody alongside it. So I got to be doing that first. But then how do I invite somebody along the way? Now, in all honesty, the last year and a half has been that kind of interesting because for years it was easy for me because I'd be like, hey, you need to come Come join me on the streets. Easy. I'm there weeks and
Hmm.
weeks and weeks out of the year.
Yeah.
Or come see me in Honduras. Hey, let me show you around. Let's go do some stuff. Let me take you up to this orphanage or this school or whatever's going on. Let's get, and
Yeah.
now it's kind of interesting where now I'm back in the States and kind of like having to reconfigure my life. And so, and I don't live close to very many like friends. Like I've got a handful of people, like a lot of my really good friends live very different places. And so a lot of it honestly has started online where I got a group of guys, we get together, we meet and we chat about stuff. We, talk about life and kids and marriage and all this kind of stuff. And so we're like kind of helping each other and holding each other accountable and all these different things about life. But like, what does it look like to show one thing? I didn't want to do this, but I've started helping out with my son. He's 5. So Wednesday nights I help out with the 5-year-old class while they do Bible study, Wednesday night Bible study, and then I help out with all these little 5-year-olds. It's not in my wheelhouse, Ben. It's not my love language to work with kids that age. It's not fun for me. But it was a need at the
Yeah.
church. And so I've been doing that. And what's so interesting about when you start doing stuff like that, there's a woman there that she's over the class and I help her, Miss Lisa. And Miss Lisa, a couple weeks ago, in passing, she doesn't know a lot about my story. I've shared bits and pieces. She doesn't know a lot. She knows I live in Honduras. She doesn't know a lot past that. She, in passing though, she said, I met a couple homeless folks here. We live in a town like 5,000 people. Homelessness is not exactly an issue around here. She said, I met a couple homeless folks. I'm trying to help. She was just kind of telling me this story, just in passing. And I said, oh, well, I did that kind of stuff for 12 years. So let's chat about it. And all of a sudden, I'm getting this opportunity to share all these different things, all these lessons I've learned, and maybe help her get the lessons without the scars, like help her not to fall into the traps and holes that I fell into. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden, because I am helping with these little 5-year-olds and do their little colors and teach them these little simplified Bible stories and all that kind of stuff, well, I get this opportunity to share life and experience on stuff with this woman who is right in the middle of doing some things that I have a lot of knowledge about. There was no plan for that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just about being open and putting yourself in a situation, even if it's not in your wheelhouse or it is uncomfortable. Maybe because it's not in your wheelhouse, maybe because it's uncomfortable, go do those things, like go seek those things out. But it's just kind of fun how God works, but you gotta be willing. You gotta be willing to get outside your house and go do that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So what was it like, just as this is personal, this isn't even really, I just am curious, what was it like finding a church?
It was interesting.
Connor and I were talking about that on one of the first episodes because he stepped away from vocational ministry. Yeah. And so in one of our episodes, in that first episode, he walked me through what it was like for he and Mindy to try to figure out where they were to worship. What was that like for you and Brandy?
Yeah, it was interesting. And it's been hard because like for years we had a community. We lived we lived on campus at the school where I was teaching, and we had a lot of Hondurans, but also a lot of Americans, a lot of Canadians, and we had this like really tight knit community. And if you needed, sugar or onions or something like that, like whatever you're cooking, you could just go like walk across the campus there, like walk 50 yards and there's another apartment and you can borrow some sugar. We'd get together and play basketball and play football and like all these things. And so we had this amazing community and life groups and Bible studies. And then you get outside that, and now you're in a house and you don't even necessarily know your neighbors 2 doors down and like dealing with that. And so we wanted to find a place that offered opportunities for that kind of community, that was doing more than just Sunday morning, that provided things maybe during the week, provided things for kids and families. And so that was part of it. And so then you kind of narrow down, okay, here's the churches that kind of have that. And here's the churches that, the average age is not 82 years old. And so you're finding, people that, are maybe somewhere in age and life stage. And then you just got to visit. And, I tell you what, man, I'm to a point, I know a lot about a pastor.
How was that? How was it?
It was fine. It's kind of weird because you feel like you're shopping, which is like, ugh, you feel kind of, I don't know, when you're church hunting, church shopping. I don't know. I don't like that. And so trying to get deeper. And whenever we did find a church, it's actually a Baptist church, and which I hadn't been to a Baptist church since I was, again, with my grandparents years ago, because I worked for the Methodist church forever. But once we found this church, I invited the pastor to lunch. I said, hey, let me take you out to lunch. And, I know a lot about a pastor at this point, just how they talk on Sunday morning. I know what's important to you. I know what you're struggling with. I know what's going on in behind the scenes, just because I've been around it for so long and I did it for so long. It's like when you got it, you can spot it, And so, went to lunch with this guy, and he's a couple years older than me. He just had his 4th kid, so we're a very similar stage of life. But just to hear him talk, and again, that authenticity, just being honest and being real and being open, and
Mhm.
that I was like, this is where I want to go. This is the kind of leader that I want to follow.
Mm.
And so that was a big part of it. And
Mhm.
even though Sunday morning worship, it's old school, a lot of hymns and a lot of like, again, stuff I haven't been a part of in a long, long time. It doesn't matter because the heart of the
Mhm.
church. It,
Yeah.
if I go in the church and Sunday morning is not, songs that just came out from Hillsong or whatever, and I've got all these emotions and we're playing these certain riffs on the guitar and the drums, and if I'm not having this emotional worship experience, it doesn't matter because the heart of the church is in the right place and it's going in the right direction. And I think you can
Mm.
feel that, and so the church ain't perfect, by any stretch, but that was a big part of it. It's just finding the kind of place that had the leadership I wanted to be led by, but then that was doing some really cool things in the community, offering opportunities for my kids to get involved. So that's at least that was my criteria.
Yeah. Was it comfortable visiting? One thing that surprised me, kind of, but Connor was saying is so odd. It's so strange. I mean, you're a Christian, like a sincere Christian, like you're completely infatuated with Jesus, like enthralled with
Yeah.
God, and sold out, whatever cliche you want to tag on it. And but still, you're going into these different churches, and it's like it's uncomfortable. He was like, Mindy and I were completely caught off guard at how uncomfortable it was to visit churches. And if I ever again, he was saying, in vocational ministry, I will approach
Hmm.
and interact with visitors completely
Yeah.
different. Did y'all experience any of that? Was it
So
weird,
anytime
uncomfortable?
you go from being on stage to just being somebody out there in the pew, that's a weird experience, right? And
Mhm.
I tell you what, man, for
Mhm.
years I could not go to a worship service without being judgmental and critical, right? And it's like, I wouldn't have told that story. I wouldn't have used that scripture. I wouldn't have cross referenced it. Like,
That's how
oh
I
man, it's
am.
so
Yeah, yeah,
hard,
yeah,
and you
yeah,
just got to kill it. You got to kill
yeah.
that stuff in your own self, your own heart, because that's pride, spiritual pride coming out.
Mhm.
And it's also freeing
Mhm.
when you get to a place where it's like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that it's like the heart of this place, the community of this place. Like these are the things that really matter.
Mhm.
But yeah, like so this
Mhm.
church, it had like a nice little visitors packet and had all these little things about the church and different things about different ministries. And you fill out the card and they reach out to you. And the pastor's super friendly, and they've got several people that are just, I don't know if it's their job or responsibility, or whatever, but they make a point to just be nice to you. Hey, thank you so much for being here.
Mhm.
Not weird about it or anything, but just
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
make you feel welcomed. And 'cause that's nothing when you come into a new place, you're new because like you feel everybody kind of looking at you like, oh, especially if it's not a big church. If it's only a couple hundred people or
Yeah.
less, it's like you stick out, and then you're sitting in somebody's seat. You didn't know it was their seat, but that's their seat. They sit in for every Sunday for the last 25 years, and you took their seat. Little things like that. But
Yeah.
that's the thing, just to be welcoming without, I don't know, without imposing necessarily, where you just assume
Mhm.
the thing, but just to, I don't know, encourage people to thank them for being there and
Mhm.
encourage them to be to come back and get involved in different things that you're doing and to get to know them too. That's another thing. I can't tell you how many times, especially when I was like high school, college age, where I would be having a conversation with somebody, and then that they started. Somebody would meet me and they start a conversation, and then at some point the conversation would flip, and they would say, "Well, let me ask this: Do you know Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior?" And it's like, "Oh, this whole thing was to get me saved. You don't actually care about me."
About me.
I
Yeah.
tell you, man, this happened Super Bowl Sunday.
It's,
This was
oh my gosh.
2006 Super Bowl Sunday. I remember it because Super Bowl Sunday used to be like one of my like holidays. Like it was bigger than everything else. And I would
Yeah.
start watching. I'm there. I'm in front of the TV at 7 a.m. and we're gonna be there all day. I got my snacks. I got everything. I'm good to go. And the dorm I was living in college had this really big TV down in the lobby. And so Super Bowl Sunday, I'm there. Um, Watching all the pregame coverage and like all the stuff, right? I'm super excited. And this beautiful young lady sits down on the couch like across from me, and she just starts talking to me, and we're talking about football. And I'm like, I have met my spouse. Like this is Lord, thank you for sending this wonderful woman, and she's asking me all these questions about football. She's talking about her, her favorite players and teams, and like we're just getting to know each other and stuff. And then like maybe 15 minutes in, again that question. Oh, let me ask you: do you know Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior? It's like, huh, huh, yeah, yeah. I got saved, several years ago. I go to this church. I do this, that. She's like, oh, okay. All right, well, you have a great day. And she got up and left. I was like, that did not feel good.
Yeah, yeah, no,
And so when we approach
yeah.
people in that way, where people are really just a means to an end, right? We're just trying to get them saved. And now nothing wrong with like wanting to get people saved. Like that's fine. We reconcile them back to God and all that. But when that is really all you care about and you don't really care about the person, people know that, especially these days. So I think that's another big thing is
It's like your shirt. It's like your shirt. People aren't projects.
exactly.
Um, you said that, put it on shirts and push that, and it's
Yeah.
gold. Because it is that. You sit down, you get to visit it, and you're like, okay, this person actually wants to know me or
Right.
cares. But it's all in an agenda. It's like this. It's working to this
Right.
point, like you're, a name on a honeydew list or a project, and um, it's cheap. It's counterfeit grace. Um, yeah, and it
It
sucks.
does.
So if you're listening to this, don't
Don't
do
do that.
that.
Get to know people.
Uh,
Get to know them.
yeah,
Let them get to
yeah,
know you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah,
That's this whole thing's on
yeah, and
relationships.
that's the one thing our culture is missing, man. And that's what I think the Lord is kind of taking us in this project. Really, now that we've started kind of being obedient, hard-headed people bang their head against walls for a long
Right.
time, Gabe. Not that you would know
Oh, not
anything
a bit.
about that,
Never heard that.
um, but it is, in that I heard, so a pastor, the first pastor that I served under, who's a great friend of mine, I love him. He gave a sermon one time, and he was talking about we have become a back porch
Yeah.
culture. And what he was talking about was like there was an era in America where we were front porch people, and even to the points of having like love seats and
Mhm.
sofas on our front porches. Certainly swings, and folks walking around. You'd strike up a conversation, and there was community. And then somewhere there was this shift, and wooden privacy fences started going up, and we may have like some decorative furniture on our front porch or whatever. It's fall, y'all, on a sign or something. But then in the back is where we had the patios and the fire pits and the pergolas and all the stuff. Like all of our investment was in the back, outdoor screens, and we became this culture. He said where folks pull into their driveways, into their garages, press the button, and the garage door goes down. And then they get out of their car, but their time is spent in the back and only with people who are invited
Right.
in. And that sermon settled with me. And the takeaway was like, we must become, as Christians, we must become front porch people, and get back to this, no agenda, no project, just getting to know
Yeah.
people. Listening to their story, helping them if you can, inviting them into our story, your story. Um, I think that's going to be a big piece of this work. I hope that ends up coming out of this project. But so I got two folks now on my list, just from you. I know that I need to end up talking to Corey's
Yep.
father-in-law, with his bourbon
Yes, that's a
club.
cool story, man. And
Um,
back to your point, the whole being front porch people. So Tony is his name, and he loves Jesus, and he also loves bourbon. And he's one of those guys who can tell you all about it. This came from this brewery over in this part of the country, part of the world, and they use these kinds of barrels, and they use this process aged for this amount of time. You can taste it here. Like he just knows all the stuff, right? And so in his neighborhood, he's done this twice now. He did it in one neighborhood, then he moved and started it again. So proved it works twice, where he started a bourbon club with the men in the neighborhood, where it just invites people in. So, hey guys, even if you don't like bourbon, never had it before, whatever, like come on, give it a shot. Let me show you how to really savor it, right? Let me teach you the way. And started this bourbon club, and everybody kind of brings in.
Give it a
Yeah,
shot.
there you go. I
Give it
like
a
I see what you're
shot.
doing.
Get it?
And they have all these different flavors, and they'll try this and try that, and they'll talk about it. But then out of that opportunity, and they were meeting like once a month, then you get all these moments where you get to talk about life, talk about marriage and kids and faith and what have you been through?
Mhm.
What are you going through? Oh, I just got diagnosed with cancer. I'm dealing with that, like
Right.
whatever, right? And all of a sudden, you get to share Jesus in these moments, and it doesn't feel forced. And people know that you care about them because you've been caring about them. You invited them into this third
Mhm.
space. You didn't come into it with an agenda to get them saved. Like you just said, hey, I like this thing. I think you'll like this thing if you come join me and be part of it. And then all of a sudden, you get to have these conversations. You get to speak into people's lives. You get to invite them to be part of whatever stuff church wise, mission wise you got going on. It's amazing how that happens.
Mhm.
But again, you got to be willing to get outside your house, on your front porch or beyond, and invite people, which is uncomfortable and can be awkward. But it's
Mhm.
actually easier though, inviting someone to that kind of a opportunity than it is to some others. So I think in some ways it does get a little bit easier when you create these opportunities, these moments, these events for people to be part of. And then naturally, organically, you just kind of let things work because that's what the spirit does. It invades
Yeah.
naturally. You don't have to
Yeah.
force it. It will come up. And then when those moments do pop up, you just naturally, organically step into them. And now that you've gotten to
Yeah.
know people, you built relationships, you can talk to them as a friend, not as a to-do
Yeah.
list item, right? And so, yeah, it's just really
Yeah.
cool what he's been doing.
Yeah. We have to get him on at some point. And then your father-in-law, I would love to have him on and just
Yeah.
listen, just have him share stories and awesome. Well, I don't want to keep you any longer. Thank you. You have been generous with your
Oh, it's my
time.
pleasure.
And thank you personally. Thank you for pouring into me. Thank you for taking care of people that are under my stead, my responsibility for years. And even after all these years, still giving, giving, giving. Thank you. Um, and so, for those of you that know Gabe, that's kind of where he's at. He's back in the States. He's in Alabama, raising babies, loving people. Um, Board games, that was a surprise to me. So,
Yeah.
board
Yeah,
games.
strangely enough, man, it's something I got into as a hobby when I was in Honduras. Basically, just as an escape, I started designing games, started a little podcast about game design, and over the course of several years, it turned into my primary income. And it was nice because I didn't have to raise a lot of support. I didn't have to go around writing donation letters and stuff like that. Like these board games and this podcast, this community I built up, kind of paid for everything else that needed to be paid for to live
Mhm.
overseas. And yeah, it's just been kind of wild. And I tell you what though, man, even though the show and the community and stuff I built up around it, it's not faith based. It's not like a Christian board game. Like no, it's just games. But i I have honestly had more conversations more conversations about Jesus because of that board game thing than I have because of working in ministry full time. It's wild. It's
Wow.
wild.
Wow.
Honestly, I feel like people who aren't quote unquote professional Christians, people who work at churches and are
Hmm.
pastors and ministers and all missionaries, all that kind of stuff. In a lot of ways, you have an advantage
Hmm.
because people don't just assume you're saying things because you're supposed to, or assume you're saying this just because you need more people to pay tithe money and offering on Sunday morning. Like there's less assumption of agenda when you're just some person that has just some regular old job. In my case, it's kind of a unique job, working in games and the gaming industry and things like that. But it's not faith based. And whenever you do tell a story or you say something and people they hear it, right? Like the other day on a podcast, I was talking about something. I said, "Well, do you want to build it on rock or build it on sand?" Little things like that, right? That call to scripture. And I tell stories all the
Hmm.
time about working with the homeless and working in Honduras and missions and my faith. Like I don't shy away from that, even though it's not about that. Let me tell you a story about this thing I experienced. And then people will send you a message. They'll send you an email or a DM or whatever. People you've never met before who live somewhere else in the world, and all of a sudden you get to have this conversation about some kind of time that they're going through, some kind of situation. Some their wife has cancer and
Hmm.
they're listening to my podcast at the hospital during cancer treatments, like whatever it is, and all of a sudden you can speak life into somebody, not because
Hmm.
you know not because you had that agenda, but just because God will open up those opportunities. And so, yeah, I think anybody
Hmm.
listening to this that you're not on the payroll of a church, like you have an advantage because you can
Amen.
be more authentic and people they trust it easier than if you're behind a pulpit. It
Hmm.
just is what it is.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, That's so good. There's so I just have a little scratch of paper, and every time you say something that I love, I jot down where we're at because I don't know if I'm going to use it as the sound bite for the
Right.
teaser, And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11
Oh man.
of those marks. So, um, yeah, but that yeah, and I think that's a gigantic piece of the authenticity in a relationship is when you come in it and you maybe are not in vocational ministry, people's guards aren't already
Right.
up. Like you've been in vocational ministry. Connor and I talk about this. Other friends of mine, I got a friend here in Missouri, Brandon, and we talk about this kind of stuff. And it's like when you show up and you're the
Mhm.
pastor or you're the whoever, all of a sudden it may not be all the way up, but there you may look like the neighbor from Tim the Toolman Taylor, and so you have to work to get that down before you can even build an authentic relationship.
Right.
Um, so that's really good. Our folks who know you, how can they find you? What is the podcast? I know that I don't know that some of them may or may not be into gaming, but I know they love
Yeah.
you. And so, how can they catch up with you? What is it that you're doing? How can they find
Yeah.
you?
So the podcast and the community is called the Board Game Design Lab, and that's where and I've
Okay.
got over 300 episodes of podcasts at this point. And so if you ever want to hear stories, man, there's 300 plus opportunities to hear all sorts of stories and ins and outs. And again, I talk about missions and faith and games, everything kind of all there woven together. But that's probably the best place.
Hmm.
And you can find me on Facebook, find me, send me an email. It's just my name at hotmail.com. I still got one of those Hotmail
Yeah,
email addresses. People make fun of me nowadays. I don't
I
care.
thought that was awesome. Yeah,
You can tell I'm an OG.
I thought it was
I've been on the
awesome,
internet a long
dude.
time, man.
I was like, hey, I was like, hey, what's your email? I'm going to send you a link for
Mhm.
tonight's episode. You're like Gabe Barrett at Hotmail. And I'm like, yes, it is.
Hopefully, it's
Of
coming back in
course it
style.
is.
Everything comes back around. Maybe it'll be cool again one day. I don't know.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Well, Gabe, thank you. Thank you. I'm sure we'll have you on again at some point if you're willing, but thank you. Thank you for your time. And God bless you, man. Thank you.
Thanks, man. It's always a pleasure chatting with you, man. We'll see you again soon.